Some of you guys are seriously considering making the move to home church, and I want to save you a major headache on the front end. The mistake that a lot of people make when shifting from what you know a church to be, a traditional church, with all the bells and whistles and the paid preacher and the order of worship and all the organization and orchestration, people know that's what church looks like, and you just start with what you know. And when you move that into your living room and you try to recreate the big institutional church format in your living room, it is an absolute recipe for disaster, and I don't want to see you go through that. So let's talk about why that is the case, why that's a natural thing for us to try to do, and why it makes zero sense in home church. The first thing, why is it a natural thing to do? It's because it's what you know. Simple as that. You've seen it maybe your entire life. You think, oh, if we're going to have church, we're going to have 2 songs and a prayer and another song and communion and then another song and a lesson and a closing prayer. And if you've seen it 10,000 times and you think we're going to do church in my living room, then you're probably going to do something similar because you've not been outside the box to see the big picture and to also see the final destination of where that ends. And I'm going to tell you the final destination of where that ends. When you incorporate that structure and constrict your home church into that structure, people are going to be burnout. It's just too orchestrated. It's not organic enough. It doesn't have enough Holy Spirit involvement or lead. It's just too constricted. And here's exactly why it's not going to work. Here's an email that I received just yesterday. I am personally aware of 2 smaller groups, 20 to 30, that have given up. It seemed that they were intent on doing it all like the big church. And in both cases, it wore out the leadership. That's exactly right. I've seen it a million times. Why? Why do people burn out like that? Here's a few reasons. The first, the traditional church requires a large volunteer base. Somebody has to set this up. Somebody has to prepare communion. Somebody has to greet at the door. Somebody has to be ready to pray, and another prayer, and communion, and have a lesson ready that takes 10, 15, 20 hours to prep. You don't have the same volunteer base. You don't have 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 people to draw off of. You might have 12. You might have 6. You might have 15 or 20. It's just not the same thing. And so when you have that many things going on with that few of people to fill the roles, it's just going to burn people out. Number 2, the traditional church pays staff to prepare a lot of these things. That means that there's someone who is paid to sit down and study for the lesson. You, on the other hand, and your people probably work full-time jobs and may not have the time to prepare 20, 30, whatever minute lessons. So when you try to bring that into the home church, it's not sustainable and it's not feasible and it's not realistic for people's actual lives, and this has to fit actual lives. The other thing that you run into is when you have this 20, 30, whatever minute sermon as if delivered by an expert that we're so used to in traditional church with a skilled teacher, a trained professional seminaried teacher, it really gives the impression that that's what maybe a person or 2 can do, but nobody else can act like that or do like that or teach like that. And that's not really the message that we want to send. And that's not to say there's not a gift of teaching or someone who has some expertise in that or actual super good skill in that. It just means that we really don't want to send a message that just some people are just totally incapable of sharing their faith or studying the Bible with somebody. The third is that the traditional church really values the quality of the gathering, and for lack of better words, from a performance perspective. You don't want hiccups. You don't want mess-ups. You don't want long pauses. You got to get it in a set amount of time, because if you don't, there's all these people who can complain. Home church doesn't operate like that. In fact, people in home church are much more agreeable to hiccups, problems, disruptions, kids running around or whatever than in the auditorium and the big church. And in fact, what we see in home church is often the hiccups are actually Holy Spirit movements rather than hiccups or disruptions to our schedule, because we don't have this super duper tight, heavy volunteer, lengthy amount of teaching and prep based system that you're used to in traditional church. You don't have the time, you don't have the money, you don't have the volunteers, you don't have the paid staff to do things like a traditional church. And so when you just try to bring that in without considering all those things into your living room, it just doesn't work. The reality is, it might work for a couple weeks, it might work for a couple months, but then you're absolutely going to get destroyed. You're going to get burned out. So we've even had to make some adjustments where the people who lead our singing have said, like we prepare and we come and we lead worship, but some weeks we just need off. And so we've really simplified things. We've really lowered the bar on that. And there are some weeks where, we just have super duper simple, many weeks, just super simple. We've created some little songbooks for our gatherings, just pull these things out, sing a cappella. Other weeks we have people leading our worship who've really prepared for that week because it's absolutely their gift and they love pouring out in that way, but they can't do that every single week, okay? And the other thing is, in the big traditional church with a strict order of worship with welcome and song and prayer and song and another song and communion and another, all these things, that is so strict that there's not a lot of room for variation. There's not a lot of room for testimony. There's not a lot of room for someone just to break down in tears and get love and focus and attention and prayer that they need on the fly, on the spot. Home church, the lack of orchestration helps it connect with reality in a way that people know that there's an ebb and a flow and a freedom to express or to make requests in a way that you would never do in a traditional church, because that would be seen as disruptive to a strict order in the auditorium, whereas in a living room, it's quite natural. So what do you do? If you've never thought through this, it's helpful to get a little bit of guidance. And I'm going to give you some principles to consider and a couple of approaches to make this super practical, and I'm going to keep this as short as possible. The first is, don't commit to anything that's not sustainable. When you look at it and go, we have this grand plans to do this and this and this and this. If it's not sustainable, do not commit to it long term. You can pilot something or say, for the month of October, we're going to do X, but you understand that that's a temporary thing. And home churches can better embrace temporary pilot approaches than traditional churches, because in the traditional church, you stand before the church, you say, we've made this change of direction and we've spent months praying about it, and there's all this buy-in, there's all this investment, there's all this rumination and spinning of the wheels to come to a decision. You're not likely to say, we're going to pilot this thing and just see if it works. Oh no, we know this is going to work. This is the way it's going to be. It's going to be awesome. That's the message in the traditional church. But in the home church, you can just say, let's just try this out and see if this is sustainable. See if this is agreeable to our gathering. And if you see it's not sustainable, then you have wiggle room to make adjustments, and it's not a huge deal because you're not dealing with 500 people. So make sure what you do will last, and if you're not sure, just kind of try it. Don't commit to it. Some churches, for instance, with home church, have a meal every single time they meet, full meal. And some absolutely love that. I'm just going to say that for many, that's not going to be a sustainable thing for the hosts, for many of the ladies. I don't mean to stereotype, but often case that's who all this gets just kind of left to. For a lot, that's not sustainable. So you have to say, well, we value our table fellowship time together. What's a scale, amount of food that we can bring that is simple and easy to where we can do this consistently? Or if you want to keep the scale of food high, you make the frequency low, so that this is something that is sustainable. It's in a rhythm, so that you can continue to do this for foreseeable future as best you can. And if you can't, you just make a change. Having a full 30-minute, well-prepared sermon that took someone 15, 20 hours to create, probably not sustainable for people doing home church who are not paid full time to set aside time to do these kinds of things. So you need to be able to have time in the Word that really helps people get in the Word and understand the Word and share it and live it, all these things. But it's sustainable to your group. It's sustainable to your skill set and the amount of available margin and time that people have. So there's a few options here and the meeting patterns. Instead of the whole orchestrated, strict order of worship that you got to get through it. If there's a hiccup, it's an absolute disaster and you're going to hear about it in the meeting. What you do instead is you might incorporate Discovery Bible Study as a format for your gathering, incorporate a few songs in there, a few prayers in there, put the Lord's Supper in there. But as far as the lesson time, to make this low on prep but high on impact, something like Discovery Bible Study. There's another approach called 3/3 groups, which I will put a link in the description, and which is very much like Discovery Bible Study. It's a low prep but high impact way of walking through a gathering, walking through a meeting in a way that is reflective, in a way that that really emphasizes living out the Word and being in the Word and reflecting back on the week, how we see God moving with testimonies and things like that. So there's some ways to very much simplify your prep so that when you gather, you can just walk through a set of prompts and things like that that make it to where anyone can facilitate the lesson or the conversation. Even small children can facilitate the lesson, and that's actually an important thing to do periodically, is incorporate the children in that position so that they see their value in the gathering. They see their position and their participation in the gathering in a way that if it's a professional, polished, in the Hebrew and the Greek and all this kind of sermon, your kids are already out. Most of your people are already out. We've created now hierarchies and positions that very few people can occupy, and that can undermine the DNA and the feel and the principles of your home church gathering. So hopefully this saves you some headaches. I'm going to put some links in the description to Discovery Bible Study, to 3/3 groups, and to some training for you if you are interested in learning more about this. But I'm here to help you. My email address is here on the screen as well. Please reach out. That's what we do. We help. So God bless you. Putting another video here up on the screen about home church that I hope you'll just take a few minutes to watch. I think it'll bless you. If you haven't liked or subscribed, please do that now. Take care.